Thank you, Dr. Ruddy. Thanks everybody for joining us. Really excited to have, sorry, I probably should say who I am. I'm Dr. John Draper. I'm the co-advisor to the Sports Analytics Club here at Ohio State. I work in the Fisher College of Business. We both teach sports analytics classes in different departments. And excited to collaborate together on this project here. Really happy today, really excited to welcome in Dr. Nick Elam. Dr. Nick Elam, the creator of the Elam ending. Those of you that may have seen it before, if you watched the NBA All-Star Game, is probably the biggest stage, but also the basketball tournament, which I'm sure he will talk about here shortly, has adopted the Elam ending. So it's a new ending. I'll let him get into it, new basketball ending for excitement, for all kinds of different reasons. I don't need to spoil anything. Dr. Nick Elam is an assistant professor of educational leadership at Ball State University. And he happened to be in Columbus today for another presentation he's going to be giving later on today. So it worked out really nicely that we got him to join us in person. So I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you. Smiling, it's hard to tell, but no, I'm really happy to be here, and thank you, Dr. Draper. Thank you, everybody who made this conference possible. This is going to be really fun. So yeah, presentation is called Elam ending from concept to the court. So we'll dive into some of the analytics. We'll dive into some of the kind of the personal journey of it all. But I thank you for your interest and attention. And I'm going to hang around, like Dr. Draper said. I do have to go to another presentation here later this morning, but I will be around for a little bit after the presentation this morning. So if you want to come up and chat or exchange contact info or anything like that, just connect that way. I'll be around for a little bit.
Get you going here on set it up so we can get the whole screen here. And if you need to see the chat, if you have questions, feel free to place them in the Q&A section. And like I said, I'm trying to get it set up so we have all of our technology working well. All right. Screen. Actually, you said there's a video clip. Is that right?
So yeah, if we go to that second slide, then we can start out with some of the fun stuff. We'll start out with some highlight clips here.
Let me just make sure I'm sharing it in the proper way for a video clip. They said if you have questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will hit those at the end of the presentation. If I think we get to see you, but I'm assuming that everyone can see okay. We'll give it a double check to make sure we're good to go.
All right, thank you. All right.
Just click forward to the right. No. Try one more time. 6 times more. At least you have. I'll click for you.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead to the next slide. And just for this slide, I'll take the steering wheel here. Just this, I want to make sure we go with here. Because I mean, one good problem to have is that now, just in the short time that Elam ending's been implemented, in just a couple hundred games, we've already created a stockpile of great highlights and great moments. And so when I wanted to share some of those highlights, trying to narrow that down, it was a good problem. And so I had to first limit it to just action from 2021. And even then, there's just no way we're going to have time to go through all these. So I'll pick and choose here. So one great moment happened. It was at TBT, the basketball tournament, the championship game this year. It was a game between Boeheim's Army and Team 23. Doesn't like that.
I'll get it. I'm assuming it's on YouTube. Probably the easiest way to hop on here. I have a 4-year-old.
Also, if you go to Twitter and if you search Sports Center Elam ending, they'll probably bring up this clip.
Guess we can all sign in on my name. I get students to follow me. All right, so Sports Center.
Yeah, Sports Center, Elam, Indy, I think. All right, bring this up good. There we go. All right, so want that sound.
Yep.
They need 3.
It's hard to get to the free throw line. Now this is a matchup Rice has. Sykes bucket.
Got it! Bayhawk Harvey wins it!
This is Syracuse alumni team that won it on essentially a sudden death situation. This is right down the road in Dayton. We'll see Jim Boeheim here in a second here in Dayton to support the team. The game came right down to the wire, and it's those kind of sudden death situations where the Elam ending really shines. But there are also, other situations where we see some great moments. I'm going to search. There we go. All right. So. Okay, so let's set up another situation. This is earlier, same tournament this year. This is an earlier round 3. And this is a team called Aftershocks. They are a Wichita State alumni team playing on their home court. Another game that is coming right down to the wire. They just forced a stop against Team Challenge ALS. They had a chance to win it, but they forced a stop. They get a rebound, and now they're pushing it in transition. Go ahead and play that.
For the win. That one's blocked. Numbers right now for the Aftershock. Fran Camp!
Well, for one particular clip, it was a Sports Center clip from this year's NBA All-Star game. But I can't remember. Basically, it was Zach Lowe gushing about the Elam ending. That's what I wanted to show, but I can't remember exactly where to find that. But okay, so this year's All-Star game was more of a lopsided game, but still, the Elam ending, with that guarantee that the game's going to end up with a game-winning shot, you're able to win the game with a little bit of flair. And so that's what happened this year. We had the game decided, again, this is like a 20-point game, but we had Damian Lillard pulling up from almost half court to win the game, and Zach Lowe the next day on Sports Center talking about it.
Just pick the name. No scores, no numbers, nothing complicated. And the Elam ending, the target score, it's a home run. It's always Dame time, even when there is no clock.
And then one other top level event is the Canadian Elite Basketball League. And it's a professional league in Canada, obviously. And they had this year. They're using it for every game, and I think they will forever and ever. And one exciting thing about the Elam ending is any league or event that has implemented it at any level, whether it's a really grassroots level or at the top levels, any league that has implemented it has never gone back to the regular format. They've continued to use it. And that includes the Canadian Elite Basketball League. So what we're about to see here, let's back that up. So what we're going to see again here, this is the championship game this summer. This is between a team called the Edmonton Stingers and the Niagara River Lions. And we're going to get a shot here from sideline or from baseline, I'm sorry, of the winning shot and the celebration. Now, normally when you see that sort of a celebration in a basketball game, you think, okay, well, they must have made a buzzer beater. It must have been like a 1, 2, 3-point game, something like that. Now you see again how exuberant everybody was at that celebration. I want somebody to guess, see if you can guess, and I've got one prize. It's the only prize of the day. But if anybody can guess what the margin of victory was for this particular game, you can go home with this plush "I love OSU" thing, whatever you call it. Any guesses on what the margin of victory was in this championship game that led to such a celebration like that? Yes.
12 points.
12 points. It was higher than that.
18.
18 higher than that.
24.
24 higher than that.
29.
29 higher than that.
32.
32 higher than that.
36.
36 is the answer. In a 36-point game, we saw a player make a shot, go to the ground, the whole team rush out as if it were like a buzzer beater, pick up his team, they embrace, they form the dog pile on the court. And that's kind of the beauty of the Elam ending, is that now these kind of great celebrations, which we only get to see so rarely, far too rarely in my view, under a time format. Now, and you think about how a championship game would play out if it was a 36-point game under a time format, how would it normally play out? You would just see the leading team dribbling out the clock. It would be seen as bad sportsmanship for them to even try to make a basket. But here, with the Elam ending, you've got to keep playing assertively to reach that target score. And that's what we saw. So okay, I'm Dr. Draper, if you're able to help me out there. So okay, let's get down to business here. Talk about, I'll give you a little bit about my background. And again, in a short amount of time, I'll have to go pretty quickly here through everything. And then for those of you who aren't familiar, I'll give a very quick recap of what the Elam ending is exactly. Also a very, very condensed timeline, stepping back to the genesis of this idea and how it grew. Then we'll start to take a little bit of a dive into the analytics and the statistics of what this format is intended to do, how it works, the rationale of it, how it's changed a little bit since its original implementation, and one unique aspect of the Elam ending that allows basketball to implement this type of format but no other sport, and then certain ways that this concept continues to grow, and hopefully some takeaways for you for how you might be able to take away something in making your own mark in sports analytics. Okay. So to talk about my background, there's at least 2 tracks you could talk about. One being in the education world. So I'm a career-long educator, and I started out as a high school math teacher in Dayton, Ohio, and then moved into school administration. I started out at nearby Utica, Ohio as an assistant principal and athletic director, and then enjoyed my time there. I was only there for a year, but I had an opportunity to come back to my old district. And so I was an assistant principal and then a head principal. And in the meantime, I was earning my PhD at Miami University here in Ohio. And then that opened the door for me to join a faculty at Ball State in Indiana, where I am an assistant professor of educational leadership. And what I do there is I work with graduate students. We are a grad program. Students who aspire to become school principals and school administrators. That's who I work with there. Okay. But since about the time I was 5 years old, I absolutely love sports and try to find some way, big or small, paid or unpaid, to keep my foot in the door or be involved in the sports world somehow. And so you see here just a variety of different experiences in sports. That includes working on the grounds crew. I just finished my 16th year on the Cincinnati Reds grounds crew. But then also, again, this idea that the Elam ending has grown into something where I get to consult with basketball leagues and events and implementing it. And that's really exciting to see it come to life. Okay. So let's take a step back and talk about what exactly the Elam ending is. Really, the idea in a nutshell can be summed up in what's there in the highlighted part, which is just you play most of the game with a clock, you play the last part of the game without a clock. That, in a nutshell, is the Elam ending. And we'll talk a little bit here in a second about what exactly the purposes are for that. Now, the format is designed that different leagues and events could tailor those settings to the style of play, the scoring rates in their leagues, because when you say you're going to shut off the clock, it begs two questions, which is, well, when do you shut off the clock? And then how do you end the game? What do you play to? So again, those vary based on the league or the event. For TBT, the format we use, if there was no such thing as the Elam ending, then TBT would use a format of just 9-minute quarters. So they would play a 36-minute game if there was no such thing as the Elam ending. Well, with the Elam ending, we essentially cut out the game clock from the last 4 minutes of the game. So we play 32 minutes with a clock, and then we're going to play the last stage of the game without a clock. Now, the way to set that target score is it's going to be 8 points beyond whatever the leading team score is when you shut off the clock. So let's say the score is 65-60 when you shut off the clock in the fourth quarter. Okay, well, we're going to come back. We'll take a media timeout. We'll come back. It's still 65-60, but now we're going to play first team to 73 wins the game. And the idea is, well, we'll go ahead and go on to the next slide. Actually, back up. I'm sorry. I'll wait. Okay. All right. So the idea is, okay, if we're coming back, there's no clock for that final stretch, 65-60. Now we're playing to 73. Well, if you've got the lead, you can't just play passively and stall the game away. You've got to keep playing assertively to get to that target score. So that's how it addresses this number 2 point here. If you're a leading offense, you can't just stall and play passively. You've got to keep playing assertively in a more natural and exciting style of play. Because again, the idea of the Elam ending is not to change basketball. It's really to do the opposite, to preserve that more natural and exciting style of play. If you're behind, you're never going to get to a point where you're desperate to stop the clock. Because of course, under a time format, you get so desperate to stop the clock where if you don't stop the clock, the game ends, where you're just willing to give away 1 or 2 free points to your opponent because you're so desperate to stop the clock. Well, under the Elam ending, you can continue to get legitimate stops. You don't have to rely on that fouling strategy. So that's how it addresses that first point there. Also, if you're behind and you're on offense, you don't have to force up these ugly and desperate shots. You can continue to get your best look. So that's that third point there. We're going to see both teams playing their best through the end of the game, and that's what we want to see, that high-quality basketball all the way through the end. And that whole combination of factors makes the outcome of the game less predictable. I mean, under the regular format, under the time format, very slim deficits are very difficult to overcome late in the game in basketball. The game becomes very predictable. But the Elam ending, it won't necessarily add this avalanche of additional comebacks, but it will lead to a healthy uptick and add some uncertainty, some more suspense, because the leading team doesn't have that ability to use the clock to its advantage as much. And because the game ends with the swish of a net, we get so many more memorable game-ending moments. You just saw a few of those. And I mean, it delivers in so many situations, whether that's a really close game, like a few of those that we saw, or even if it's a lopsided game, you have that opportunity to finish with a little bit of flair, or if it's some sort of a landmark game, like a championship game, even in a blowout, you still get that moment that's going to be remembered for a long, long time. So the way this all started out, again, I've been a basketball fan since I was about 5 years old. And so by the time I got to the University of Dayton as an undergrad, all my housemates happened to be big basketball fans too. And so we were sitting around on an Elite Eight Sunday in 2004 and watching a game end like so many we had seen before. It wasn't anything new, but it just happened to be Duke and Xavier. And I think you can find this game on YouTube and kind of see what the game we were watching. And we were, it was a game like so many others. We were so fluid and athletic and exciting all the way through. And then you get to the last part of the game, and that's when you see the worst basketball. And that's where the air just totally went out of the arena. It was just this excruciating crawl to the finish of foul and just walking back and forth to the other end of the court. And Duke had a pretty slim lead, but that slim lead just felt so safe and secure because they were getting these free points. And we just looked around at each other watching this game. It's like, this is like, what are we watching here? Like, well, this is so weird, the way that the style of play becomes so warped and frankly just changes into an inferior brand of basketball. And we were tossing around ideas of, well, how could you fix that? And we tossed around ideas like, well, maybe if you just punish the fouling team more harshly, that will fix the problem. But what we didn't think through at the time was that, well, if you just punish the fouling team more harshly, you're taking their only option, which is fouling, which isn't a very appealing option anyway. Now you're making it even less appealing without giving them a better alternative. So that would actually totally backfire. You would end up with more fouling and fewer comebacks if you were to do that. So that's not a good idea. What we didn't realize is that the NBA and the NCAA actually tried something like that generations ago, and they got rid of it quickly because it didn't work. So you can't just punish the fouling team more harshly. Well, we didn't have any great ideas, but a few years later in 2007, we had all gone on with our lives, but the light bulb went on for me in thinking that all these different phenomena that we see, whether that's the fouling by the trailing team or the stalling by the leading team or the sloppy play by the trailing team, this phenomenon of seeing really big games and good games just kind of fade out with a whimper without any signature moment. All these different, certainly a lot of clock controversies and things like that, all these different phenomena are attributable to the game clock. And so in 2007, I thought, well, I wonder what would happen if you just got rid of the clock for the last part of the game. What would happen? And at first I thought, okay, well, there's got to be some reason why that wouldn't work. That seems too simple. And so I actually started to explore it just out of intellectual curiosity. I was trying to figure out what is the flaw here? Why won't this work? So for weeks and months, that was kind of this independent project of really thinking through, okay, trying to scrutinize it from every angle, trying to punch any hole I could into it, thinking like a coach of how I could circumvent that rule, whatever it might be. And again, after weeks and months, I finally thought, I think this is pretty sound. And not only is it sound, but I think this could be really cool. And so by the summer of 2007, I had convinced myself that this idea had a lot of merit. But then the really hard part started, and that was trying to convince other people that the idea had merit. But so I started this effort of reaching out to people in the basketball world, anybody I could, any type of stakeholder I could, trying to generate discussion or get someone to implement this idea. Again, for years, not really getting anywhere with it. When I first laid it out in 2007, I laid out all these different options, but my preferred option was actually getting rid of the clock for the entire second half of the game. And that the way to set the target score would actually depend on the scoring rate from that particular game. High scoring games, you'd add more points, low scoring games, you'd add fewer points. By 2013, I was getting a little discouraged, but I thought that, I just wasn't gaining enough traction. So in 2013, I actually changed to one of those other options that I laid out originally and started to favor just getting rid of the clock for the last part of the game and then picking some static number for any given league or event would have its own static number that it would use for all games. That simpler idea might be a little more easily embraced. And it started to get a little bit of traction. I mean, we're still talking on a minor scale, just getting on discussion boards and having a few people have some positive comments about it or even give me a chance to write about it elsewhere. But even then, it just wasn't making any great steps. So in 2014, I realized that my data collection just wasn't robust enough, that maybe it just wasn't making a convincing argument on how prevalent and how serious these flaws were at the end of timed games. And so, because at that point, I really just kind of done it yearly at the NCAA tournament, for those 60 plus games, I would gather data for it. But then I thought, well, maybe I just need to go all in. And so in 2014, I really did start going all in. And extracting data. It's not as simple as just looking at box scores or play-by-play summaries, because the kinds of things I was looking for, you won't find there. So I literally had to watch the end of all these games and gather data on it to create a more robust sample and a convincing argument that yes, I mean, these phenomena that we see at the end of basketball games really are a serious thing. You can go ahead. Well, finally, in 2016, I started to get a little bit of traction. I sent this very detailed PowerPoint around to a lot of different leagues and events, and it wasn't the first time. I mean, I've been doing this on and off again for 9+ years at this point. And then finally, I received a reply from someone who had a little bit of interest. This was the founder of TBT. His name's John Mugar. I mean, at that point, I had gotten pretty used to not getting any response at all. And if I did get a response, it was more just kind of politely saying, thanks for your interest in your idea. And that was kind of it. But here, he actually seemed genuinely interested. Well, as the weeks and months went on, we kept in touch, and he decided that for their 2017 event, because they had been around since 2014, he decided for their 2017 event that they were going to try this format out on an experimental basis, and that they were going to name the idea the Elam ending. So in 2017, one of the most memorable weekends of my life in Philadelphia, I got finally, after 10 years, getting to see this concept come to life at what they call the Jamboree. These were just their preliminary games, but it was a wonderful day. The idea worked really well. These were the jerseys that were worn here. If it weren't a pandemic, I'll pass this around, but I'll just leave this up here. But they even included a watermark inside the numerals that says Elam ending. Really cool. You have to get up close to see it. But I mean, as well as it worked that day, I mean, I was really nervous that day because of that weekend. It was a Saturday and a Sunday. I knew there was a possibility that after 10 years that this might be it. Like, it might be gone in a blink, that maybe it wouldn't work well enough to gain any traction and it might be over. But after I saw it and seeing how well it was received by the players, by the coaches, by the referees, by the broadcasters and the broadcast partners, by the tournament organizers who had taken a chance on this idea, how it exceeded my own expectations. Well, I should say met my own expectations. I knew somehow, some way, this concept was going to live on beyond that first weekend. Now, I didn't know where necessarily, because TBT kept me in a little bit of suspense. It wasn't until May of 2018 that they finally said that yes, we're going to go all in on this, and they've never looked back. They've implemented it across the board ever since. And then I've had lots of cool opportunities to discuss this concept since then, in over 300 different outlets. So you can go on. So then in 2019, now they're feeling really good about the format. And again, because they were the only ones who had anything to lose. I didn't have anything to lose by them trying it out, but they certainly did. By 2019, they were feeling really good about it. And so they redesigned their game ball that year to have my signature on it. Again, normally I would pass this around, but I'll just leave it up here. But this is about as cool of a tribute as you can get. So this is a prized possession of mine, certainly, for a lot of sentimental reasons. And again, I continued my outreach during all this time. My job's getting a little bit easier now because the concept is having a chance to speak for itself. It's not just me speaking on its behalf, and people are seeing great things. And so, it had taken 10 years for this concept to be implemented for the first time. And then just about 2.5 years later, now I get a call from people in the NBA league office. I've been reaching out to them all many years, but a lot of that was one-way communication. But now I get a call from them saying that first they want to thank me for my passion for the game and my innovative ideas. They want to acknowledge, they were very candid in saying that their late game product sucks. They didn't use that word, but they were very candid in saying that their late game product is very, very flawed and it needs to be addressed. They said that in their conversations with Players Association, that the players see a lot of merit and the concept of an untimed finish to basketball, that they're going to implement the Elam ending at the NBA All-Star game, and that they're going to send me and a guest, all expenses paid, to All-Star Weekend in Chicago that year. So that was a great day when I received that call in January 2020. And then to see it play out so well in the All-Star game that year, really receive a lot of positive feedback, was really exciting. Later that summer, again, the professional league in Canada adopts the Elam ending, so now it's got a foothold in the international scene and lots of opportunity for growth there. And then this year, just exciting opportunities. Again, the idea being more embraced, me being more known, it's almost surreal, getting really cool opportunities to speak, even teach. I now teach sport management. Early days of this project, and there were days occasionally where the best thing that happened to me that day happened to be something related to this project. And it was just like, I had no idea how long it would take for this to get off the ground. I had no idea whether it would ever get off the ground. And it would be some sort of like little baby step forward. But I look back on it very fondly now. And so I encourage young people to start doing that earlier in their life. Start writing that down. And it just forces you into a positive mindset. So that's something that I enjoy speaking to high schools or middle schools. I know many of you aren't very far removed from high school. So if you think it'd be cool for me to come to your old high school and speak to students there, I'd love to do it. I'll have some contact info here at the end of the presentation. But we can go on. So let's dive into the numbers a little bit. Again, to make a good idea or a good argument for the merit of this concept, you have to first show that there's a need for it. So when we go through these slides here, you're going to see some numbers from the NBA and the NCAA. That's from that 2,900 game sample that I mentioned earlier. And then also that the format is working in some way. So I'll use TBT as an example here. Well, again, that number one objective is to eliminate that deliberate fouling strategy. It's something we see roughly half the time in the NBA or NCAA, which I think that's too much as it is. But then you keep in mind that, well, most of the games where we don't see it, it's because the trailing team has just given up. They don't even bother with fouling. So really, those numbers kind of undersell the problem and the prevalence of how desperate trailing teams are. But with the Elam ending, not having the clock for the last part of the game, it's virtually wiped out any inclination to foul deliberately. You want to see teams keep playing assertively. In the NBA and NCAA, very, very rare to see a final stretch of a game not have any sort of stalling. Whereas in TBT, we've cut that down greatly. Maybe for one possession or so, as the time portion winds down, you might see a team milk the clock a little bit, but again, it's only for about one possession. It's not in the most crucial possession of the game. It's a little bit earlier in the game. And, there's a price to pay for that. Sometimes teams, that backfires on them because, even if you stall then, you're going to have to ramp your offense back up. I think this is really interesting here. We're used to seeing teams in the NBA and NCAA score over 1 point per possession throughout the course of the game. and play that high quality play. And then you get to the most important possession of the game and it turns into a blooper reel. It turns into a joke. And to me, that's just so unsatisfying to see games decided that way. It's like, what are we improving at that point? And it's not like it's the defense really clamping down and making it tough for the offense. It's the clock doing the heavy lifting for them. The clock gets to do all the defending for them and make their job easy. So, again, when I see numbers like this, it's like, I try to compare that to what that would look like in baseball. It'd be like seeing Mike Trout step up to the plate, with the bases loaded in the bottom of the ninth, and then have to bat left-handed. And it's like, well, I guess that's really cool if he gets a hit, but I'd rather just see Mike Trout at his best. And for me, it's the same in basketball. Sure, it's cool every now and then when somebody makes a crazy shot, but I want to see the best basketball when the game is on the line. I think that's the most exciting way to settle it. So when we think about the Elam inning, there are no buzzer beater situations, but there are what I would call sudden death situations, kind of a next score wins. And we're seeing teams execute at a much higher level. We did take a little bit of a dip this year, so that's interesting, but still much higher quality of play with the Elam ending. We're seeing the best basketball when the game's on the line. The hope of a greater comeback, I think, is really exciting too. So let's revisit that fouling phenomenon. We talked about the prevalence of it, how often it happens just a few slides ago. Now let's talk about how effective or ineffective it is. This was really the most striking thing I found in my research of taking that deep dive of how often the fouling strategy actually worked. Because again, I already knew as a basketball fan, it's not my favorite part of the game, but I was willing to sit through it because I thought, well, okay, maybe the trailing team comes back a fair amount of time. But then I saw, I couldn't believe it, that the trailing team doesn't really come back. They when they have to resort to that fouling strategy, they only come back about 1% of the time. And the overwhelming majority of the time, they're widening or they're maintaining or widening their deficit. They're not even gaining any ground when they do it, which isn't a surprise because again, they're handing away free points by fouling. Why would we even expect them to come back in that sort of a situation? I'd also say that these numbers are too kind, again, because they don't include any of those blowout games where the team doesn't even bother with fouling. But in TBT, again, as long as you get stops and scores, you're still in the game. You still have hope. It's still tough. You're still definitely at a disadvantage, as you should be. But at least you have an authentic way to work your way back in the game. And we've seen Dr. Draper.
Sorry, we're having some sound issues.
All right.
Good.
So then, this notion of ending the game with the swish of a net has just created so many memorable moments. Trust me, I love a buzzer beater as much as anybody else, but I think it just happens far too rare. And even that, the clock still gets in its own way because we finally get this moment where we should just have this totally uninhibited celebration, but instead we have to go to the monitor to see if the shot was released on time. And even then, it kind of dampens the celebration. Well, the Elam inning takes out the guesswork. As soon as that shot goes through the net, you can go crazy, and teams do. They still have that same level of exuberance when the shot goes through the net. The kind of ending we want to see at the end of a basketball game is teams rushing out from the bench and embracing on the court, running around the court, and we see that. So that's why I always say the Elam ending is a way that we can keep and enhance the things that we do enjoy about late game basketball, because there are things that we enjoy about late game basketball, but we can eliminate or alleviate the things that we don't enjoy. Okay. So we'll go through these very quickly. These, what we've already gone through, those are like the main goals of the Elam inning. Here are just some, if we go down the line, just a few other things to address. One thing, I don't use the word guarantee very often, but one thing I think is a little bit under discussed is about clock controversies. I will guarantee that when you shut off the clock for that last stretch of the game, you are not going to see any reviews, controversies, malfunctions, errors related to the game clock. That absolutely will not happen. One thing that I think is a little bit over discussed is the effect on time. I think there's kind of a misconception that the Elam inning is just meant to speed up games. That's not really the case. It's just what we want to see is, if you look at the time format, most of the time, the most drawn out, the lengthy finishes are games where the drama is not building. A trailing team has to foul repeatedly. By doing so, they're maintaining or widening their deficit. And so it just makes for this excruciating crawl to the finish. Well, in the Elam inning, what we want to see, you can go ahead. What we want to see is that games that end a little bit quicker are the blowout games. And that's what we're seeing here. The blowout games earning a little bit quicker. And that makes sense because you've got a leading team that now they don't just have to dribble out the clock. Now they're clearly a superior team. It's like, hey, let's go get our points and go home. And that's what they do. In games that are a little bit lengthier, we want those to be dramatic games where the suspense is building. And it makes sense because those are games where the leading team is not getting to the finish line. The trailing team is gaining on them. The suspense is building. So it's like, hey, we're all about having more basketball here. And so that dual effect is what we're seeing. So that's working good. So to talk very quickly about how this format has evolved, there have been a few changes. One was when we started with PPT, it was really a shot in the dark of how to set the target score, when to shut off the clock, set the target score, because we didn't have this big stockpile of past scoring data.
Just one thing real quick, if just so you have the time, we can go a little bit longer. So
Great. About how much time?
Let's say, what do you think? 9, another 15 minutes if you need it.
Great.
The next session doesn't start till 9.
And we can always start a hair late. I'm just gonna do one other thing. I want to share this without the optimization. I wonder if that might have something to do with it. Can you see still on me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so if you need to keep going on a little bit longer, we're good to go.
Great, I appreciate it. I'll go all day if you
No, this is
you're going to tell me to stop. But
Oh, yes.
so just a moment. When we first implemented this at TBT, we didn't have this big stockpile of past scoring data to figure out what's the ideal setting. So we really took a shot in the dark. We thought, well, let's try that 4-minute mark of the last period and try +7 setting and see how that works. Well, what we'll see on the next slide, we're not ready for that yet. It just wasn't quite enough. So we did adjust that to a +8, and that's worked out really well. I won't get into much in the weeds of administering free throws. We've changed that. That's been a positive change. And then also just the way we've handled fouls on the floor, granting 1 free throw in possession for fouls on the floor during that final stretch, which is actually, again, I can give a separate talk on this. Philosophically, I think that's how fouls on the floor should be handled anyway, but it's been especially beneficial in the Elam ending. It's worked out really well. Okay. All right, so, again, one thing we scrutinize, we gather some data. By the way, one thing you're going to notice here throughout this presentation, you might have noticed that all of these stats that I'm sharing are they're not like high level advanced inferential statistics or anything like this. These are pretty basic descriptive statistics. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes that's the best way to make an argument that's going to be widely embraced is, those kinds of descriptive statistics kind of jump out at people. Now, again, depending on what your research question is, depending on what you're studying, depending on what your data is, you might not be able to rely on that kind of data. You might have to do more advanced inferential statistics. But, here we're just looking at a lot of pretty basic numbers here on how to measure the length of that final portion of the game. Because we're trying to get that right length. We could make it based on, how much, we could make it try to be consistent with the scoring rate leading up to that untimed portion. I'll skip down to here. We could just start the stopwatch when that ball is first inbounded to start the Elam ending and just let it run through all the stoppages and hit the stop button on the stopwatch when the final shot goes through the net. That's another way to measure it, which is, it's helpful, but there's not really like an ideal time. Like what, we get this data for how much time in actual time is elapsing, but it's like, is that good? Is that bad? Is that a good number, bad number? It's hard to tell. You can count the possessions during that last stretch of the game. And that's helpful insight, but again, it's like, is that a good number, bad number? I don't know. So I'm going to go back to the bullet part. I think the bullet part is the best way to measure the length of that final stretch. Let's start the stopwatch when the ball's first inbounded. And anytime there's a stoppage, we'll hit the stop button. And then when the ball's back in live ball play, start again. So as if there were a game clock, how much game time would be elapsing? How much live ball play are we getting? And keep in mind, again, we are cutting out 4 minutes worth of game time. So we want to get about 4 minutes worth back in. And with that +7 setting, we weren't even getting 3 minutes. So we wanted to bump that up. And so we used the +8 for the last few years. +8's looking a lot better. +8, we're getting very close on average to 4 minutes worth of game time. So again, I wouldn't necessarily say that's true for other leagues or levels, but for TBT, those look like the right settings that we've settled on, the 4 minute mark and a +8. Because also, just as a different example, the Canadian Elite Basketball League, so they have a little bit more of a higher scoring rate. So they do 4 minute mark +9, and that works pretty well for them. All right, so this is one of my favorite discussions. This is where, again, this is a thought that I had in 2007, and this is before the days of emojis. But if there were like that head explode emoji, it would have been about this, because I was really trying to think in 2007. Again, I was trying to punch holes in this idea, just out of curiosity, trying to figure out like, why won't this work? And I was trying to think of, well, why do some sports use a clock and why do some sports not use a clock? Well, so I was thinking of sports that didn't have a clock. Let's start with tennis and volleyball. Volleyball with its points, tennis with its points as building blocks for games and sets. Those little mini accomplishments, points, are accumulated rapidly enough that you can use that in place of a clock. Tennis doesn't need a clock because you get points so rapidly. Volleyball doesn't need a clock because you get points so rapidly. Then I think about baseball, softball. They don't have high scoring rates. You don't get runs or points there rapidly, but they have a different accomplishment called outs that are accumulated pretty rapidly. And so again, you can use those outs in place of a clock. And the benefit of that, by not having to depend on a clock, whether it's baseball, softball, tennis, volleyball, you don't see manipulative strategies down the stretch. Really, you almost see the excitement kind of ramp up down the stretch. The quality of play kind of ramp up down the stretch. So you don't see those manipulative strategies. And, on any given game, you're guaranteed that the game's going to end with that accomplishment, whether it's a point, whether it's an out, sometimes it's a run, but you have the game finishing with an accomplishment. So there are some benefits there for not using the clock. And that's kind of the attribute that allows them to not use the clock. Well, then I think about sports that do depend on a clock. Well, the difference there, you look at all these different sports, they have a much lower scoring rate, and they don't really have any other accomplishment that they could use to serve as a clock. You know, there's just the goals or the points, whatever it might be, just aren't accumulated rapidly enough to use in place of a clock. The only exception to that would be basketball. Basketball, the scoring rate is so distinct from all these other sports that it really doesn't need to depend on a clock. Now, that wasn't true in basketball's infancy. I still believe that Dr. James Naismith was right when he first developed basketball to govern the sport completely by time, because in basketball's infancy, the sport really was very low scoring. I mean, I think the first basketball game ever was a 1-0 game. And I think for the early years of the sport, basketball was a very low scoring sport. It was truly aligned with all these other sports that use a clock and need a clock. But for about a century or so, the scoring rate in basketball is clearly distinct from all these other sports. It really doesn't need to depend on a clock the way these always do, and the way these other sports do. And there is a downside for being dependent on a clock. You kind of pay a price for that, because you do see manipulative strategies when you have a clock all the way through the end of the game. You do see games that just kind of fade out, that don't have that clinching moment to seal victory. So basketball is paying an unnecessary price to continue to use its clock. It really doesn't need it. So now there is a benefit to a clock, just from an onlooker standpoint. It helps to kind of rein in the overall length of a game. It helps to make the overall length of the game a little bit more predictable. And so that's why I think basketball can have the best of both worlds here. It can use a clock for most of the game, again, for that benefit of kind of game, reeling in or reining in the overall length of the game, but then get rid of the clock before it starts to have a negative effect on the quality and the style of play. It's the only sport that can have the best of both timed and untimed worlds. I think that's what's really exciting about the Elam ending for basketball. Okay. So yeah, this opportunity to share my research, my story at all these different venues is just kind of surreal. I really appreciate it every time I get a chance. I think back to the MIT Sloan conference, being able to present there in 2018, 2019 was really a thrill. All these different settings, and now, right now we're just looking at some scholarly settings, but when you add on things like podcasts, TV and radio programs, it's over 300 different opportunities, and that's how I view it, as an opportunity to share this. And of course, adding one to the list today, it's really exciting, very proud to add this one to the list here. And then, again, that last point there, again, this is kind of a new opportunity, one that kind of blows my mind. And it's because when I think about most of these scholarly outlets, it's mostly talking the numbers, talking the stats, kind of getting into the analytics and that side of it. But then, having this new opportunity here to kind of share the personal side of it, the importance of that persistence and positive thinking, following a dream and seeing a dream come to life, being able to share that's really cool. So again, I mean it when I say it. If you think it'd be cool for me to come to your old high school and talk about it, I'd love that opportunity. So now we get into some other non-scholarly outlets. Just as cool. To see the Elam ending in a video game is really cool. To have a chapter in a book written about it's cool. To be on the NBA's official outlet of NBA TV and be on a set with Isaiah Thomas and Caron Butler talking about the Elam ending. Getting to share some of my views about my first love, which is baseball, on MLB Now, which is a very analytics heavy show, has been really cool. Okay. And then, just kind of going on down the line with some other outlets and just being able to connect with people and share my story. And it's been really cool. I think the first time, I remember the day when I saw Elam ending on the rundown on PTI, which is that's my favorite show. And I almost turned the channel as soon as I saw that Tony and Mike were not on that day. It was Israel Gutierrez, who's great, Frank Isola, who's great, but I saw, Tony and Mike's not there. So I almost turned the channel, then I did a double take. I said, Elam ending on the rundown. I'm like, well, I'm gonna stay tuned in to see what they have to say about that. Frank Isola was a little more old school. He wasn't quite ready to embrace it. He thought, well, maybe they could put in just like an untimed overtime. He was actually, which I thought, hey, that's pretty open-minded to think that way. And again, I never begrudge anybody for not instantly embracing the idea, because again, I didn't instantly embrace the idea either. Israel was all about it. He's like, let's try this more and more. So that was really cool. Okay. So yeah, just kind of the growing support. I mean, one way to look at it is, people sharing their positive praise and hearing that positive praise. Another way to look at it is kind of how certain criticisms have faded out. Things that we used to hear a lot, we just don't hear much anymore. Or if we do hear it, it's in such a watered down way that, again, I wouldn't even call it a criticism. It's people saying, well, okay, like, we like this idea for events like TBT and the NBA All-Star Game, but we're not quite ready to support it for implementation in other events. Or sometimes, again, people will say, we don't necessarily want it in all games, in that regulation, but maybe let's introduce that concept of untimed basketball. Let's do that in overtime, which again, I think is a big, big step in the right direction. Because I think what people, let's say that happens. Let's say they change overtime from let's get rid of the clock for overtime and play first to 8, first to 10, first to 12, whatever you want. I think what's going to happen is people are going to say, wow, this is awesome. This is really, really cool. We want more of this untimed basketball. And then now let's take the plunge and really implement the Elam ending even in regulation. Okay. So some takeaways, hopefully there are some things that my story, my process that translate to you. If you think you've got that next big idea for the world of sports, I definitely encourage you to document, create that paper trail of all your research, things like that, all of your outreach, have some way that you're going to be able to trace that idea back to you. For a while, it might be a labor of love, and it certainly was for me. You're going to do it. Nobody's going to be watching. You're not going to have anybody patting you on the back. You're probably not going to get any compensation for it. But if it's something that interests you enough, if you've got this burning question that you want to answer, then that's going to keep you going, and it's worth it. Definitely, you've probably heard this many times. If you're serious about being in the world of sports analytics, you need to develop your programming skills. It's something that I wish important, digestible. Again, I think when you can, using descriptive statistics is good. Sometimes you'll need to take a deeper dive into some inferential things, higher level things. And then, conferences, this is a good opportunity to meet somebody new, connect with somebody new. Hopefully, if you're not presenting today at this conference, hopefully next year you'll have a presentation that you'll share at the conference next year, or other conferences like this. Okay. All right, so this is the last slide here. Here's my contact info. I'm kind of an email guy mainly, but you can also reach out to me by Twitter if you like, or I can give you a business card today. But I really appreciate your interest and attention, and And thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Elam. I want to go through, we got one question here. If anyone else has any questions, if you can put it into the Q&A. Anyone here, I'll just kind of call out if you have questions. The question we have here is, since everybody always kind of looks for ways to hack the system, like how do you, like the fouling at the end, has there been any attempt, or have you seen anything where you're like, I don't like what's happening here yet?
Well, so I love this question, and this is an important question. I mean, I knew that this is a way I needed to look at this way back in 2007. I need to think of this from the standpoint of a coach trying to win a game. How am I going to strategize, no matter what the rules are, to try to give my team an advantage? You know, my obligation as a coach is not to entertaining anyone. My obligation as a coach is to win the game. And so thinking about, you know, again, the time format, you know, I don't like this fouling strategy, but if I was a coach, absolutely I would do it. There's no other choice under a time format. In fact, I would actually start fouling earlier in the game, especially in men's college basketball where the 1-and-1 still exists. If it was that 7th, 8th, or 9th foul in the second half, and I was trailing, I would foul even if there's 4.5 minutes left in the game. So actually, under a time format, I don't think coaches foul early and often enough. But so let's look at the Elam ending. You know, keeping that clock around, you know, until about the 4-minute mark. One thing I thought about, one thing I even heard people say when they first heard of this idea was, well, okay, I mean, if I'm a trailing team, I'm just going to start fouling, you know, with 5 minutes left or 4.5. You know, if I'm down by 8 points, I'm going to start fouling then while the clock is still around to try to make up some ground before that final stretch of the game. Well, so that's one thing that through my research gave me some peace of mind that wasn't going to happen. And we haven't seen one single team try that. And the reason for that, again, is that fouling strategy. You know, again, there was a slide earlier where we had some numbers. Right in the middle, talking about the late comebacks. Okay, right here. Okay, so this is the important stat here. Okay, so when you foul, you don't win. But not only that, when you foul, you don't even make up any ground. About 80% of the time, you are maintaining or widening your deficit by handing away these free points. Now, under a time format, it's still the right thing to do because that's still better than just letting the clock run out. But with the Elam ending, knowing that you've got this untimed final stretch, this chance to come back with authentic means, you're not going to want to widen your deficit before that. You're not going to want to turn your 8-point deficit into a 9 or a 10 or 11-point deficit going into that final stretch. So that was one thing that I thought of initially is, well, maybe that would be a way the coaches would try to manipulate this. But like seeing these numbers here, then I was like, no, teams aren't going to try it. And even though that was like a really big concern that people expressed when they first heard of this idea, is like, oh, this idea is not going to work because teams are just going to foul while the clock is still around. That hasn't happened. And even if it did happen for some crazy reason, well, we could just kind of back up when we shut off the clock. We shut off the clock at the 5-minute mark, the 6-minute mark, whatever it might be. I mean, there's ways to adjust. If that's some crazy way that became like a prevailing strategy, which I really just don't think it ever would. There are still fixes for it, but I just don't think it'll ever need to be fixed. Yeah.
Have you either tried or has anybody tried this at the high school level? Because I come from a school where we play a very slow style sometimes. And I mean, I've seen games where the team that wins scores like 20, 30 points.
Yeah. So, and it's an interesting question. And also we see that overtime deal too. I don't think this happens a lot, but we've seen it where, because in most states, there's no shot clock in high school. We'll see teams, they'll win the opening tip of overtime and they will literally stand there for 4 minutes and 50 seconds and then go into their offense. I mean, it's just the most unsightly thing ever. But so let's let's just look at the normal course of play. I think the Elam ending would have great benefits, especially when there's no shot clock. Because when there's no shot clock, you see even more of these manipulative strategies. So I think Elam ending could help. The tricky part, like you said, for high school is that the scores sometimes are very low, or there's just a lot of variance in the scores. So just like we did with TBT, you know, we started out with a certain setting. We started out with a +7 setting and found, you know, that's just not right, just not the right fit for this setting. Then we bumped it up to a +8, and we found that sweet spot. For high school, it would have to go through that same trial and error, I think. We'd have to try something out, and then, you know, we would see some good, we'd see some bad. We'd have to fine tune it a little bit. Maybe that's when to shut off the clock. Maybe that's how to set the target score. Maybe use different settings for varsity compared to JV, compared to junior high. You know, it would take some of that period of trial and error, but I absolutely think it's a great fit for high school. And we have seen it at events like scrimmages, summer camps, like different summer tournaments like that. And I think there's just such an opportunity for growth at that level. And I think it's really important growth at that level. Yes.
So sticking with the high school, I'm a Ohio high school referee for basketball. So for like, because they still do 1-and-1 and like then the double bonus for fouls, would that be something that would continue into the no clock area, or does it stick to the one shot and possession? And also the federation, the national federation just approved shot clocks at the high school level, but each state has to now adopt it. But for next season, they can start having shot clocks.
Right. So that's an exciting development. There's kind of a multi-part question there. That's an exciting development, the approval of shot clocks. But I can tell you, as someone who's a former athletic director at a rural high school with, you know, a very small budget, that's exciting in some ways and it's scary in other ways, because, you know, you have such a tight budget as it is. Now we're going to have to install, for one, the technology to operate a shot clock, and for every single game for the rest of time, now you're going to have to pay someone to operate, train and pay someone to operate that shot clock, which can be a burden on some smaller schools. So the perk about the Elam ending is it's a lot cheaper than a shot clock, and in some ways it can be just as or more effective. Now, going to that question about the 1-and-1, because we have not implemented Elam ending at a level that currently has the 1-and-1. If we were, I would say, well, let's just, because the way we count fouls, we just keep counting them. We treat the Elam ending as an extension of the fourth quarter. So we just, whatever the foul tally is, we keep that foul tally going. So I would imagine we would do the same if there's 1-and-1. But on a separate note, again, this is a little bit separate from the Elam ending discussion. This is just kind of my own commentary. Even if there was no such thing as the Elam ending ever, I don't like the 1-and-1. I don't really understand the purpose of it. I don't understand how it makes the game better. I don't think there should be a 1-and-1, regardless of the Elam ending discussion.
We got time for one more and then we'll.
I was wondering, so like you said, I know I watch a TBT and they stop at like the 4-minute mark. I was wondering if some of these leagues like thought about like just playing 4 quarters and having like the Elam ending be the 5th quarter, like, you know, shortening their quarters maybe, like it'd be a dead ball, you'd have to heap up a shot at the end.
Yeah, so that's one option, is to, you know, like for TBT, we could play 8-minute quarters and then have this like extra quarter. So that's one option. The reason one of the reasons I don't favor that is because, kind of like you said, if you did that, then the end of the fourth quarter would be a very crucial possession of the game. And now you might have to see somebody use their possession to throw the ball 3/4 of the court, you know, across the court. That's their crucial possession. So I would rather, I like the idea of being able to play through that 4-minute mark, because it's not a hard stop right at the 4-minute mark. It's the first whistle after that, or timeout after that. That's one reason. That's probably the main reason why I don't favor that. But I wouldn't rule it out. I would listen to arguments in favor of it, but that's one reason I don't currently favor
All right, well, thank you so much. I think we'll be waiting to see this at the next level soon. The only problem I have with it is I did attend I can't ever say it to TBT. I always want to say the TBT. But I attended TBT and it did not work out for Carmen's crew. So I wasn't too happy about the ending
that.
there.
I was at every game at Covelli Center this summer, and I was at many games when they had it at Capital University the previous years. And I thought, you know, I'm this guy talking about the late comebacks and everything. I thought, okay, Carmen's crew, they're gonna come through on this. And then the money team had this amazing comeback.
Well, we were not playing the best basketball. But no, thank you so much for coming and talking to us today. I think it really speaks to the innovation, how the numbers bring in with the creativity, how it mixes together. And like you said, it's not it's not the most complex thing, but it really can fundamentally change the sport. Do you see it being implemented anytime soon in some of these other leagues?
Well, if I got to vote, I would vote in Alex, but you know, I only have so much say. So yeah, that's the thing is, you know, I can't necessarily speak on behalf of anybody, but I mean, again, I think the biggest endorsement and the most promising sign is that any league or event that's adopted amending, whether it's from like some men's rec league out in the middle of nowhere to NBA All-Star Game, the TPT, to the Canadian League, anyone who's implemented it has never gone back to the regular format. They continue to use amending. So I've learned to be patient with this concept. So even if it has to take baby steps all the way to the highest levels, I think it's going to get there.
We'll keep that snowball rolling down the hill. So thank you so much for coming. Push back just a hair. We're going to start our research presentations at 9:30 in both rooms. So room 1 will have presentations. Make sure I'm correct on this, Dr. Ruddy, on baseball, soccer. Is that correct?
The program is up
Yeah.
there.
And then in room 2 will primarily be football and basketball. I might be missing a sport in there somewhere. I think there's a hockey one somewhere. I think maybe not.
Yeah, there's some crossover as well, because anyone that is presenting live is going to be in room 1.
Yeah, the live presentations will be in room 1 with also some of the virtual ones sprinkled in as well. So the presentation will go from 9:30 to about 11:15. Our next session following that will be our Ohio State athletic directors, or some of our associate athletic directors will be here in room 1. No, actually we moved it. They'll be in room 2 for the athletic directors, because the workshops are both going to be in room 1, right? No, other way around.
It's the other way around.
Room 1, see, I should read my own program. Room 1, athletic directors, and room 2 at 11:15 will be our workshop, our first workshop with Jim Albert on baseball analytics. Just so we're clear for people that are here on campus at Ohio State, the workshops will be taking place over in Gerlach Hall 365. They will also be streamed for anyone that is attending in any format. Both workshops will be in Gerlach Hall and on room 2. And room 1 will have our Ohio State athletic directors prior to lunch. Until then, we'll have our research presentations. Thanks again to Dr. Elam, and we'll see you at the next session.